False Swipe Gaming, how good was Giratina actually? The history of Giratina in competitive Pokemon, generations 4 through 7. Obviously, Gen 8 is past. We're into Gen 9 now. A little bit of an older video, but to be fair, there's a lot of information in this. And even if it's a dated False Swipe Gaming video, his team and him put in a lot of effort, and they are genuinely who I look to when I'm looking at building a VGC team, when I'm looking at seeing what a Pokemon has done, as evident by Starmie, which I'm going to have to go through at some point. But in the spirit of Spooktober, who else but Giratina, am I right? Let's get into it. Let's get into this presentation.
Next up, we have Diabolus in Pokemon, Giratina, master of Sinnoh's creation trio and embodiment of antimatter. This multi-formed draconic phantom has terrorized fans ever since the 4th generation. From Turnback Cave in Diamond and Pearl to the Distortion World in Platinum that Giratina was the mascot of, it has always exuded an aura of menace. It did so in its own movie as well as the follow-up film, but in our opinion, there are few images more blood-curdling than Giratina dragging Cyrus to the Distortion World in the Pokemon Generations episode, The New World. Today, we'll see if Giratina was as demonic in the competitive scene. So, how good was Giratina actually?
I really love Giratina. Out of Dialga, Dialga's probably my least favorite. Palkia is my second favorite. Giratina is probably my actual favorite. But I'm also biased because I got Pearl first.
And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Giratina's absolutely colossal bulk and ghost typing made it a fixture on DPP Uber stall teams. It was
You have to understand, Giratina base, because everyone likes Origin. Origin is incredibly offensive. This is still pretty offensive. Look at these defenses. A 90 speed tier is nothing to scoff at. HP 150, thick. Like, we're talking 3Cs, all caps, bold, italics, thick, if you will. Pressure, I mean, being its only ability was kind of hit or miss.
Referred to as one of the 2 great walls of Ubers due to how ridiculously difficult it is to KO it. With max HP, max defense, and a set of Will-O-Wisp, Roar, Rest, and Sleep Talk, it consistently staved off some of the tier's biggest threats with ease, notably Groudon and Lucario, even though they were hitting it with ludicrously powerful boosted attacks. Astoundingly, it could even take a Choice Band Garchomp Outrage after Stealth Rock. It was also utterly impossible to spin against, allowing the stall teams it worked so well on to maintain the hazards that were crucial to putting opposing teams on a timer.
You have to understand, Garchomp in Gen 4 was incredibly oppressive. I think Chain Chomp was one of the... Garchomp could be physical, Garchomp could be special, Garchomp could be mixed. Garchomp was insane. So to be able to hold up to Garchomp in any capacity is nothing to scoff at. That's kind of not dissimilar to if you have something in a format where Kyogre's in, right? And it can check Kyogre in any sense of the word, right? Like, you can bring it in and it's kind of cause Kyogre to kind of think for a second, maybe swap out. That Pokemon by just association is something you're going to want to look at a little better.
Giratina wasn't immovable though, since much of the tier revolved around dragon type offense, but those dragons did not enjoy switching into Will-O-Wisp and getting worn down further. But Giratina's job wasn't to handle the dragons anyway. That was reserved for the other great wall of Ubers, Lugia. Both of them having pressure to drain the low PP moves like Draco Meteor meant Dragons' health wasn't the only thing on a timer.
Oh my god. Could we still make Giratina Lugia work in VGC in Gen 9? Like, I'm thinking about that. I mean, I think Spectrier or Calyrex Shadow Rider, I think those are going to be pretty big threats. Yveltal is going to be a pretty big threat. Like, what if you could stall, like, super hard?
Especially since if push came to shove, Giratina was more than capable of swallowing an attack and resting the damage off. Giratina's pressure was also immensely useful in helping drain the terrifying Kyogre's water spout. Giratina's main issue was a severe lack of offensive pressure and a major weakness to spikes. Even if it blocked Fortress's spin, Fortress would simply litter the field with spikes, and that severely hampered Giratina's survivability. This, in addition to its slow pace, meant that Giratina was mainly relegated to use on stall teams, which could use its own Fortress to level the playing field. Giratina wasn't completely hapless though. It could use a calm mindset and sweep opposing stall teams once its teammates went down, and they could no longer phase Giratina out. It would also leave Fortress and Lugia with crippling burns in the meantime. It got by just fine with Mono Dragon coverage, given the move's 1 resistance and a lack of immunities.
I mean, we didn't have Fairy type back in Gen 4, so yeah, if you wanted to choose Draco Meteor, Dragon Pulse, Dragon Claw, whatever, right? Like, you could just use that. We didn't have fairy typing as we got in Gen 6. So you run Dracometeor, whatever the hell you wanted to, that has Dragon, which is very important to note in older formats. Dragon was really, really good.
Offensive teams, it could set
really
up
good
against Stealth Rock Groudon and was insanely difficult to overpower, given how most Dragon moves in Ubers were special, as were Ice Beams from Kyogre and Mewtwo, and Dark Pulse from Darkrai. As such, it wasn't uncommon for Giratina to end up sweeping. Plus, now that it was packing Dragon Pulse, with the exception of the Dragon neutral Dialga, the Dragons wouldn't be able to switch in to threaten Giratina out.
Right.
Not even if Giratina was asleep, if it chose to run Sleep Talk over Will-O-Wisp. It wasn't as consistently effective at stopping Groudon and Lucario without Will-O-Wisp, but its partner Lugia using Reflect would ameliorate these issues, and the upside was potentially winning certain games on the spot with Giratina. Platinum came and turned the metagame on its head by introducing Giratina's Origin form, which
Giratina Origin form functions completely differently, in my opinion. It's not just that it's attack is swapped, attack and defense, and special attack, special defense are swapped, because HP is still the same, speed is still 90, right? It's still the same stat distribution. It's just these are attack and defense have been swapped effectively. This is the ability as well. You have to hold Gricious Orb, which is going to give you a benefit regardless. Let me show you. Levitate as well is its ability. So you're not really going to be stalling it out, but you could say, I don't know, pair it with a Garchomp, right? A Garchomp that's going to Earthquake, and you have Levitate, so you don't really have to worry about anything. You know, I mean, I guess theoretically, if you wanted to, you could also put this on the same team with Lugia, having the Great Wall, as well as a very offensively typed legendary. Because, right, how you have, like, offensive types and defensive typing, right? Like, for example, you look at something like Zacian in general, right? Steel Fairy, right? Especially Zacian Crown, right? Very, very offensive typing, very strong. Whereas we use something like Water, right? Which, yes, it has its offensive moves. Bulky Water is a known thing. It's been a thing for many generations at this point. Bulky Water types are just a thing. Suicune being one of the most, notorious of them. And Ghost Dragon, especially like Sword and Shield format, right? Dragapult had the same typing. Remember how Dragapult just kind of did things? Yeah, same concept.
was an absolutely incredible Pokemon. Its biggest boon over regular Giratina, which became known as the altered form, was Levitate. This meant it didn't care about spikes or toxic spikes whatsoever. Not having to worry about getting worn down so quickly, and thus being unable to block spin or check a threat, was absolutely amazing. The Earthquake immunity to help with Groudon as well as Choice Garchomp was also highly useful. Origin's defensive and offensive stats were also the inverse of Alter's. Though Origin's defenses were noticeably lower and it could not hold leftovers thanks to the required Grisius Orb, it was more than bulky enough to take several resisted hits from the likes of Groudon, Kyogre, Dialga, and Palkia, as well as not needing to be in utterly pristine shape to withstand one strong super effective hit. 100
it has enough bulk that you can shrug some things off, but not to the same bulk and effect that Giratina Alter would have.
defenses are more than adequate when packing an absolutely gargantuan 150 HP. However, Giratina O wasn't going to be focused on taking a lot of hits, apart from the Stray Fortress payback. It was mostly going to be focused on using that Grisius Orb's boost to its stabs and its meaty offensive stats to dish out those hits itself. Those offensive stats meant Giratina O could now make better use of its base 90 speed, which was the defining benchmark in Ubers, and as such, Giratina O was regularly involved in speed creep wars with Groudon, Kyogre, and Dialga, all looking to get an edge on each other. Sometimes it even ran a plus speed nature to get the jump on Lucario. Being
90 is a very good base stat, because remember, if you go, say, Jolly or Timid, right, you go a speed beneficial nature, you're adding 10%. I think it's 10% rounded down, right? You're what, base 99 at that point? Is 10% of 99 base speed, if I understand that correctly, right? Which, like, sure, you're not outspeeding Garchomp with base 102. I mean, you're outspeeding Mega Garchomp, but not in this generation, right? Because it goes down to 92. Like, it's not a... I think you're faster than Rayquaza at that point. I think, isn't Rayquaza like 95 base speed? Like, you're outspeeding Rayquaza if Rayquaza is running something like Adamant or, like, Modest, right? Like, that's not nothing if you really wanted to go ham into being that aggressive.
Such an effective abuser of the spikes it was protecting meant Giratina O was excellent at procuring and maintaining offensive pressure and general momentum. And as such, it fit on both Deoxys speed-led heavy offense teams, Skarmory balanced teams, and Fortress-anchored hard stall teams alike. In the Platinum metagame, it usually used a substitute Combine set that dominated Blissey and severely threatened stall. Given how...
Actually, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to use a substitute set because of how, because as it can shrug off some hits, right? So because it's locked into its item for Gracious Orb, because it has Levitate as well, you can substitute it. It has fairly decent bulk and HP as is, so you're making already a high HP substitute, right? And then if it survives the hit, clearly you can use it to set up or do whatever you need to get a few hits out, right? It actually, that fits really, really well with what it wants to do. That's impressive. This is why I watch Full Swipe Gaming, because I I see things and I'm like, that actually makes a lot of sense. And maybe I can apply it from this to something else, right? Where I take all this information and either use Giratina or use something Giratina adjacent. Always recommend Full Swipe.
How it could punish any phasing attempts from Lugia with a brutal Shadow Ball. However, it could also use a mixed set that was more immediately threatening, with powerful Draco Meteors and Outrages to hit both physical and special walls, as well as Hidden Power Fire or Thunder to threaten Fortress, depending on if it had Groudon or Kyogre on its team. The instant power of Draco Meteor was especially crucial for making Giratina an effective check to Rock Polish Groudon that threatened it with Dragon Claw. Then, upon the release of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Giratina received Shadow Sneak, and this turned it into a truly elite Pokemon. Its mixed set was now far and away the preferred variant, as it had terrific utility with its powerful priority that kept dangerous threats like Mewtwo and the Lati twins in check, while being able to pick off anything weakened, such as a boosted Rayquaza, whose extreme speed it was immune to, and being able to finish off a bulky Rock Polish Groudon that might have survived Draco Meteor. Shadow Sneak's priority was generally crucial in nearly every game for containing fast threats in a metagame that value speed as highly as DPP Ubers, especially when Giratina O was anchoring slower, more balanced, and defensive teams. It was even able to function as a terrific lead thanks to its ability to limit Deoxys speed to one layer of hazards via priority picking it off after it had been brought down to its focus sash. It could pull similar tricks against Deoxys attack and Frostlass while also pressuring Groudon at Fortress leads. Overall, Giratina Origin did it all and was one of the best Pokemon in the metagame that fit on absolutely every team. And while the Origin form took most of the spotlight as it came to define the metagame, Giratina Altered still had some use outside of the most hardcore stall teams.
I think that Giratina Origin is probably the go-to pick whenever somebody's considering Giratina. Like, Giratina Alter has utility, it has use cases. I think generally, as I've seen, Origin seems to be the default just because of that utility, that sheer utility. It's just good.
Substitute Protect set aimed at abusing the low PP of the moves like Draco Meteor and Spatial Rend that threatened it with pressure. It wasn't anywhere near as efficient as a wall, but it absolutely dominated most offensive teams once it got that sub, such as against a Groudon afraid of Will-O-Wisp or against a choice move of a type Giratina resisted, most commonly water or electric, but it could even set up against Garchomp Earthquake, and it made Choice Band Scissor regret going for superpower like nothing.
Right, well, and anything that can deal with Garchomp. I don't know why my camera's stuck. Bear with me for just a second. I'm not sure what's going on. But anything that can check Garchomp, or anything that can even deal with Garchomp in any real capacity, right? That's not nothing. It's really not. And everything should be, considered at that point. If you can check certain things, if you can even counter or deal with certain things, you have a use case there. Sorry, I had to reset my camera. It's been doing that recently. The Windows update seemed to bork it. However, moving on. No, it's got use cases, especially if it's going to be bulky enough to deal with Garchomp. Sure, it might not be the prominent team, if you will, but it's still doing a hell of a lot.
Else. Some players even use Scarf Giratina. And other than being granted some KOs against Pokemon like Garchomp and Latios through sheer surprise factor, being able to compress the role of Spin Blocker and fast Pokemon that check threats like Swords Dance Lucario and Rayquaza was valuable for certain teams, though it was of course on the gimmicky side. Overall, while Origin had the much bigger impact, both forms of Giratina were immeasurably important additions to the Uber metagame and defined much of the tier throughout the generation. As a restricted Pokemon, Giratina has had very limited periods when it's available in VGC, and even when it is allowed, it had incredibly stiff competition for the 2 restricted slots. And honestly, when you're going up against Dialga's incredible typing, Palkia's offensive prowess, or the incredible game-changing abilities of the Weather Trio, Giratina doesn't have much to offer. Nevertheless, the Renegade Pokemon has managed to sneak its way into a few notable performances over the years through its unique ghostly traits. Danny TTS Zollner made a Giratina Palkia team work to win win the Newark VGC's senior tournament and placed top 10 at US Nationals. And former Smogan administrator Scarm used the same team to place top 8 at Nats.
See, there you go, the jolly nature. So you're going to be at that 99 base speed.
Explains Giratina's use as primarily coming from its ghost typing, most notably to protect against the rampant explosions that were constantly going off before the move's nerf. His offensive Giratina held a Yacht Berry to live through the chills of opposing Abomasnows and Mewtwo's, and had a moveset of Shadow Sneak for priority and outplaying Sucker Punch, Dragon Claw to hit the large amount of opposing dragon types, and the standard Protect. But Giratina's true strength in VGC comes from its own ability to exploit just how standard Protect is via the use of its signature Shadow Force. Giratina forces opponents to think twice about protecting, as it possesses the unique ability to bust through protection with a monstrously powerful move.
I know people give Urshifu a lot of crap and a lot of flack, which I think a lot of it with Urshifu is well deserved. I think it is, because it has the ability to go through Protect with Unseen Fist, right? Shadow Sneak did, or not Shadow Sneak, Shadow Force. Yeah, Shadow Force did this as well. I used it with Dragapult in Gen 8 too. However, I think the difference is that this is a 2-turn move to get that benefit. So the tempo of that's just going to be greater, and I would argue requires a little more skillful play than you having Urshifu and just Unseen Fisting it, right?
Game allows Giratina to both deal incredible damage on its own and enable its teammates who would rather get around Protects, namely Explosion Metagross, who is an absolutely perfect partner to Giratina. They get to attack together, and Giratina doesn't even have to protect to avoid damage from its partner. In general, Shadow Force was such a powerful move in its own right that switching to Origin form wasn't necessary, and Giratina thus was mostly seen in its altered form. Giratina's best performance in 2010, however, came with a different set of teammates. Ryan Deagle Beagle Chambers managed to make top 8 at
I see Ray Rizzo there. I see him. A lot of Ludicolo, actually. Wow, a Ludicolo on a Sun team, too. That's got to be a Kyogre counter, then.
Worlds, with the squad consisting of Ludicolo, Mewtwo, Toxicroak, Ho-Oh, Palkia, and Giratina. What you have to keep in mind is that the lack of team preview in 2010 meant quite a few players brought more than just 2 restricted Pokemon, pivoting them in as appropriate to deal with opposing threats. In this case, Chambers says his Giratina was actually pretty much dead weight. He slapped it on his team last minute and barely ever used it. He says he'd rather have had a 3rd unrestricted Mon to make his team less predictable. Nevertheless, this Giratina made use of one of the only unique things Giratina had going for it other than Shadow Force, Tailwind. An incredibly useful move that still didn't make Giratina worth bringing over Chambers' Ho-Oh, Mewtwo, or Palkia. And other
I use Tailwind. I love Prankster Whimsicott Tailwind, but even then, Tailwind back in this generation, until Gen 8, Tailwind wasn't dynamic. So you use Tailwind, and the next turn you'd have your speed doubled. And as we get into Gen 8 Sword and Shield, speed became dynamic, and thus we had... it was Gen 8, right? It wasn't Gen 7, right? It was Gen 8 that speed became dynamic, I think. Yeah, it was Gen 8. Because I remember having to fight Ultra Necrozma and speed not being dynamic. Yeah. Tailwind's a move that you should absolutely consider if you're looking for speed control. Think of like the opposite of Trick Room.
Other than that, Giratina didn't see much play. Although future 2015 world champions Shoma, Shade Vera, Honami used it on quite a few of his very first teams when he started out. So there's that. The importance of hazards and spin blocking increasing in Generation 5, with the immensely important durable Ferrothorn spiking all over the place, Tentacruel and Excadrill rising as effective spinners, the former of which also set up toxic spikes, and the addition of the Arceus forms, the Ghost variant of which was also a new spin blocker and tremendous Calm Mind sweeper. Altered Giratina found use on the most hardcore stalled teams, with its physically defensive variant being able to block even the mighty Swords Dance Excadrill spin. It was also one of the few Pokemon able to stand up to the famed Extreme Killer, and countering the terrifying new Blaziken was also valuable. Some sand teams use specially defensive Giratina alongside Pursuit Tyranitar to handle Kyogre, with their own Excadrill being able to relieve hazard pressure on Giratina, potentially.
So what you have to understand about Gen 5 Black and White is that everything that was OU, like Smogon OU, going into... So from Gen 4, going into Gen 5, everything that was OU effectively got shifted down to UU. Everything UU got shifted down a tier. Gen 5 was insane power creep. And so if you were still able to play with the big boys up in OU and Uber's tier, you were good.
with help from Tyranitar's pursuit against opposing spin blockers. Being able to better sponge hits from Calm Mind fighting Arceus was also useful given how troublesome it usually was to send teams. However, Origin Giratina's Levitate was still the preferred method of dealing with spikes and toxic spikes while blocking spin, given how often the field was littered with them as a result of spinning being so difficult, and thus severely hampered both Altered Giratina's and Ghost Arceus' effectiveness. It mostly used the mixed set from the previous generation, but once Black and White 2 came around, the Shuffler variant took over once it was discovered that the new Dragon Tail had immense utility in forcing spikes on the opponent while still dishing out good damage itself. It had great synergy with Shadow Sneak, which would pick off the Pokemon weakened by the shuffling with ease. Both moves were of course boosted by Grisius Orb, making this strategy even more powerful. As did
I think wasn't Grisius, Lustrous, and Adamant, weren't they 50, were they 50% before? I know they're like 30 now. I think they got nerfed. Or they're always 30. I can't remember.
The protection offered by Substitute against Ferrothorn's Leech Seed and Fortress's Toxic, it usually racking up even more residual damage with Will-O-Wisp for even easier Shadow Sneak pickings. Giratina O could also opt for Magic Coat instead of Substitute. It was mostly useful for completely dominating Deoxys speed leads, but could also bounce spikes from Ferrothorn, Fortress, or Skarmory back at them, while even potentially turning the tables on Darkrai. This variant of the Shuffler was quite strong and a go-to for offensive teams, given its ability to consistently spread damage on several members of the opponent's team, a rare trait, while being able to check several dangerous Pokemon. However, it tended to get worn down while doing its job, best exemplified by the risky yet necessary maneuver of switching into Tentacruel and chancing a Scald Burn. Groudon beginning to use Lava Plume could be troublesome as well. Thus, a rest-talking Shuffler emerged, which kept the core efficiency of Giratina O as a phaser, but meant it could get its hands dirty, so to speak, not having to tiptoe around status, not getting shipped uncomfortably by repeated switches into Stealth Rock, and actually being able to use its bulk to take hits. The last move could still be Shadow Sneak. It was the most synergistic option for when Giratina O was awake, allowing it to enact its shuffle and priority strategy as it normally would, but with the luxury of being a bit more cavalier with its health, as it could rest if needed. However, it's
so weird seeing like Genesect and Darkrai in game because they're event Pokemon, right? It used to be, we used to call them mythicals, right? But I think they're event Pokemon now, right? Or did they used to be called event? Now they're mythical. There's some weird naming convention there. Like, I'm not used to seeing, because you can't use them in VGC. You can never use Manaphy. You can never use Darkrai. You can never use Jirachi, right? They're just event Pokemon. And so it's so weird to see just the assuming this is Smogon format, just to see these mythical event Pokemon. Very weird to me, but showcasing the power that Giratina in the right hands has.
Players who found their Giratina O to be sleeping often use Roar in the last slot to give themselves the 66% chance of shuffling, which could be effective as phasing moves did not go last if called by Sleep Talk, and gave Giratina O good odds to phase Extreme Killer even if asleep. Roar,
it ignores that -6 priority if you Sleep Talk it. That's wild, actually. I wonder if that still works.
Was also effective at blowing away the dangerous Substitute Ho-Oh. Regardless of the specifics of the set, Shuffler Giratina O was a consistent game-to-game performer that rarely struck the winning blow itself, but was invaluable in getting its team into a position to strike that blow in the first place. Overall, Origin Giratina was once again a crucial component of the Uber metagame. Altered Giratina was much more niche, but it fulfilled certain specific important defensive requirements and thus enabled powerful builds that would fall apart without it. Gen 6 was quite a different look for Origin Giratina. It went from protecting and abusing hazards to removing.
I don't know why YouTube does that. It's so sad. Like, it's so muted now. It used to be so like the reds used to be vibrant, the gold used to be. I don't know. Gen 6 and on, the colors are just so muted, and it makes me a little sad.
Them with the newly buffed Defog. Xerneas was the biggest threat in the tier, which led to a lot of Klefki to counter it, which led to a lot of spikes being laid, and a Defogger that hovered above them was invaluable. The difference between Giratina O and the Laddie twins in this department is that Giratina O didn't rely on its speed at all, investing entirely in defense and either attack or special attack.
Interesting.
Meaning it wasn't nearly as crippled by a potential Klefki Thunderwave, and also that Klefki was not exactly a very good switch to Giratina O, given that it could be smacked by either Earthquake or Shadow Force from physical sets, the latter move being used to prevent Xerneas and setting up on it, while generally being powerful given Steel's nerf to no longer resist Ghost, or a combo of Thunderwave and Hex from special sets. T-Wave also severely crippled Arceus for
in the subsequent generation too. It was Gen 7. Didn't Steel lose its resistance to Dark as well? Steel has definitely gotten some nerfs over the generations.
And Yveltal, who thought Giratina O couldn't threaten them much. Finally, Giratina O could escape from Mega Gengar's Shadow Tag by virtue of its Ghost typing. Giratina O taking on this less aggressive, more defensive support role was also seen in the importance of its defensive niche, notably being able to go toe-to-toe with the king of the tier, the mighty Primal Groudon, checking offensive sets and defogging against support sets. It was also able to stomach a hit and retaliate against Extreme Killer, and staved off other major threats in Mega Mewtwo X, Mega Kangaskhan, and Mega Blaziken. Finally, with the mind game of Thunderwave and Shadow Sneak alongside the Fog, Giratina O once more posed a great threat to the success of Deoxys speed leads, which relied on quick, uncontested hazards to set the pace of the match, and Giratina O's ability to thwart that was also invaluable. It was not a particularly glorious niche, but it was a thoroughly important one, as Giratina O was consistently able to keep its team from crumbling in the face of hazards and some of the most powerful Pokemon in the game. It wouldn't do it forever, but being able to do it just once was immeasurably important. It was the backbone that protected its teams from danger and allowed them to fight.
It might not necessarily have been the thing that's going to cause you directly to win the game, but indirectly it's causing you to win the game because it's dealing with key factors your opponent has. It's dealing with certain stressors like Xerneas, Klefki, dealing with, as we just saw, Mega Blaziken. It is building the support structure to get you that win, is how I describe it.
Giratina was once more found on certain variants of Hardcore Stall, as it was able to withstand hits from Choice Band Ho-Oh and normal ground and fighting Arceus, while being able to escape Mega Gengar Shadow Tag, unlike Lugia. It also handled a host of dangerous Megas, such as Salamence, Mewtwo X, Blaziken, and Kangaskhan. However, it was no longer a check to Groudon, whose half-fire typing gained upon going Primal made it immune to Will-O-Wisp. In general, Giratina's inability to do damage didn't do it any favors, especially when it was not exactly checking a majority of the metagame, given the
Right, and this is where you're seeing that Alter is falling more and more behind, and Origin is shooting ahead.
Popularity of Primal Groudon, Primal Kyogre, Xerneas, Yveltal, and Ghost Arceus. Stall was fairly ineffective in general, wasn't used as much as a result, and wasn't always able to fit Giratina on the rare occasions it was used. This was specific enough to ensure Giratina Altered never saw a ton of usage, as it didn't fit other styles of team at all. It certainly had the defensive utilities an experienced player could use to plug holes in a certain squad, but it was quite niche overall. Giratina wouldn't have another chance to break into VGC until 2016, but its competition was even steeper this time around, with the introduction of the primal Pokemon Mega Rayquaza and Xerneas, who simply...
I got in a conversation the other day about Mega Rayquaza and how people are like, you should be able to Mega without Mega Stones, and I'm like, no, Mega Rayquaza is broken because of that. I mean, there's a couple other things due to the stat block it has, but you can Focus Sash a Mega Ray, you can Choice Band a Mega Ray, you can Choice Scarf a Mega Ray, you can Life Orb a Mega Ray, you can Yachi Berry a Mega Ray. You can do so many things with that item slot off of that stat pool and the moveset as well. Dragon Ascent being a flying type close combat is insane.
Packed far more power than Giratina. While being able to break through Protect is still a nice gimmick in VGC, it's not quite worth sacrificing one of your restricted slots for. And Giratina's appearances were few and far between. Nevertheless, like a strange apparition from the distortion world, it still managed to put together a few placements. And I apologize.
It's not that it's bad, it's that there's just things that are better, if that makes sense. Like Giratina in Giratina isn't a bad option. It's just that there's things that just outclass it. There are things that require less setup. There are things that have an easier barrier to entry to get going, is how I kind of word it.
Apologize if I butcher any of your names. Hong Wei Lai brought it to 3rd place at Taiwan Regionals, and it had 2 showings in the Chile Regionals top 8, courtesy of Sebastian Lara and Ariel Romo. The new standard power in 2016 necessitated that these Giratina be in Origin form to avoid being dead weight, and even so, Giratina found a hard time keeping up in 2016. Origin Giratina was an excellent defogger and checked to Primal Groudon once more in Generation 7. The two attributes, of course, went hand in hand, and a similar dynamic applied to a new stealth rocker, the Ghost Weak Duskmane Necrozma. Overall, not changed in the way of Giratina O's role and how it functioned. It was basically the exact same Pokemon from the previous generation. The one notable difference was that it no longer had to be in pristine health to take a Dragon Dance Mega Salamence's Double Edge, given the Aerolate nerf. Overall, Giratina O was a solid, consistent Pokemon for bulky offense and balance teams that alleviated hazard pressure and was able to significantly threaten the dangerous Pokemon it checked. Altered Giratina was able to handle much more of the Gen 7 metagame.
Actually, in Gen 6, on that subject, what was the interaction between Giratina and Mega Kangaskhan? We're talking like full power Mega Kangaskhan from X and Y, right? Versus Oraz, where Parental Bond got its nerf, right? What was that interaction? Because you can't power up punch a Giratina, right? You can't you can't use normal moves on a ghost type as well. So, like, I wonder what the interaction there was. I'd be very curious on that.
And began providing defog for the stall teams it was on, which significantly improved their usability. With pressure, it could PP stall Stealth Rock, meaning that defog having less PP than rocks was no longer an issue. It was able to sit on support variants of Primal Groudon and Duskmane Necrozma, denying their rocks and thus a huge source of their offensive pressure. It also ran both Toxic and Will-O-Wisp, so it could cripple both of them as well as Mega Lucario, Ho-Oh, and Arceus normal and ground. However, it could also run Roar, allowing it to completely counter Zygarde complete and preventing substitute Calm Mind Primal Kyogre from getting too far. Not having Sleep Talk was unfortunate, but with Cleric support from fellow stall staple Blissey, it wasn't too much of a problem. Giratina didn't dominate the metagame in this role, but it was a significant part of it, as it was crucial to the function of many styles of stall and was overall a step up after the languishing of the previous generation.
I do like that Giratina, both O and Alter, like both of them have niches in offensive and defensive, and like they're still a good option if you know how to pilot it.
You may think that the increased power creep would only force Giratina even further from VGC, but the funky format of 2019, which had 3 different sets of rules, actually let Giratina make a few sparse appearances. Since Sun Series banned Z Crystals, and more notably the Primals and Mega Rayquaza, Giratina could occasionally pop up as a partner to Xerneas, usually in its origin form, but it was still a lower tiered restricted Pokemon in comparison to stronger picks such as regular Kyogre, Yveltal, or Lunala, and failed to record any significant tourney placings. In fact, Giratina's one notable placement of VGC 2019 came in the Moon Series, which differed from Sun in its allowance of Z Crystals. Raphael Mayer went against the grain by using altered form Giratina on a bulky team alongside Solgaleo, Incineroar, Tapu Lele, Comfey, and Milotic to take
that Comfey, actually, that triage might actually come in clutch there. Like, that might actually be relevant.
Top 8 at the Ecuador Regionals. As you might expect from the altered form, this Giratina played more into its defensive aspects, which honestly aren't bad. Tailwind and Will-O-Wisp are a nice utility combo, but as players optimize the meta and move towards the stronger meta picks, Giratina steadily fell out of favor again, especially
I mean, if you're looking for a Tailwind user, I mean, I feel that there's just better if you're just looking to strictly Tailwind. I mean, sure, it's big, it's bulky, it's got some utility, especially with its Shadow Force, right? It's hard to justify it, you know what I mean?
With Incineroar being immune to Will-O-Wisp. Once the Primals were allowed, Giratina was summarily banished again to its realm of the weird, where it probably doesn't really care at all about its low usage, because it has upside down waterfalls to entertain it.
Yeah.
And that's it. So how good was Giratina actually? Well, it was never a big, flashy uber like Mewtwo, Kyogre, or Arceus, but for Origin Giratina, due to its excellent stats, typing, and move pool, as well as Levitate, it has been an absolutely crucial part of every Uber's metagame since its introduction. Altered Giratina was more niche, but when it comes to pure walling ability, there's nothing better, and that's why it anchored the bulkiest stall teams around. Basically, Giratina was overall solid through and through. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Giratina? Would you want a way to make Altered form a little bit more common than Origin form, or do you like things the way they are? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments, and of course, thank you to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well.
I really do love these videos. I feel like I didn't provide as much commentary.
And follow the crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.
Usually I'm doubling the length of these videos, or lengths of videos, so I'm trying to cut down a little bit on that and just provide valuable insight where I can. This was a great video, and it's a Pokemon that I've loved ever since I saw it in Ultra Cave in Gen 4. It's unfortunately just kind of been the subject of being outclassed by other things. And it's not to say it's bad, because clearly if you know how to pilot it, if you know how to use it, you can clearly use it on a team. Obviously, you're going to use the base Giratina Ultra, right? You're going to use that on more stall-oriented teams in general, and you're going to use Origin Form on more hyper-aggressive teams. That's just just kind of the at base level what you'd be looking at. And it's interesting because Giratina will pop up every now and again. It's not super common. It's not that it always shows up, but it is an option that people can be cognizant of and to just keep an eye on in the back of your toolbox, right? Have a Giratina on hand, maybe both, depending on the amount of games you have, right? And it's, just, hey, you have this in your toolbox. If you see something that is, Giratina can just run right over, or maybe there's a substitute heavy meta, right? Hey, 150 base HP Pokemon here for you. Slap some IVs and EVs into that, call it good, right? I loved it. I loved it. Pulse Swipe Gaming and the team behind always put out such great videos, and I love it. The quality, the research that goes into them, the explanations. It's not dragged out. It's not drawn out. It's very, this is the tournament record. This is why this happened. This is the ability. This is the item that causes this. These are the interactions. These are the placings, right? It's just all right at you. It is a very condensed and rapid relaying of information, which I feel is respectful of one's time. Sometimes it might get a little fast, don't get me wrong, but that's not like I'm saying it's bad. That's not even really a critique. It's kind of just like, sometimes I'll have to rewind portions, but I mean, it's fine because there are people that probably watch this on 2x speed just fine. Everyone's different. And a lot of good things were brought up into here. And as always, they're putting out great work. This is Gen 4 through 7. So I'm curious if maybe there's going to be an updated video at some point. But to be fair, I don't think there's going to be. I really haven't seen Giratina really do anything, if you will, within the past 2 generations, Gen 8 and 9 respectively. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on Giratina? Do you think this is an appropriate Pokemon to do for Spooktober? What are your thoughts on Giratina in competitive? Have you used Giratina in competitive? Do you use it in singles? Do you use it in doubles? Do you use it in some other format, right? Let me know what you're using it. What do you think its strengths are? What do you think its weaknesses are? Do you think that it's incredibly overlooked? And as always, because I do float in a little bit different circles, as always, if you have not seen False Flight Gaming, please go and check them out. Go ahead and look at their content, even if it's just you scroll through like, oh, you like Ho-Oh, or oh, you like Starmie, right? And you watch certain videos, just maybe you'll find that it's you want to watch more of their videos. And I really love that him and his team continue to put out these things, because I personally use them a lot when I'm building Pokemon and when I'm trying to figure out what a Pokemon has done in the past. And even then, it's also unique because we go back to Gen 4 and Gen 5, right? In this, for Starmie, we're looking at Gen 1 through 9, right? And you get to see how they performed in the past, and maybe even in the present, you can pull from the past to, do something different. But that's kind of what I got for you today. Definitely go check them out. They put out a lot of great work, and they get a lot of really good footage. And it's very, very well done, very well made. And I do look forward to his uploads. And keep the comments, as always, civil, professional, all that fun stuff. And I'll see you in the next one.